In a quiet village, there lived two frogs who were more than just friends. These two frogs were like brothers. One frog was big and fat, while the other frog was small and thin. Even though the two frogs looked very different, their friendship was strong and unbreakable. The big frog and the small frog spent all their time together, hopping around the village and exploring the world around them. One warm afternoon, the two frogs went on one of their usual adventures. The frogs hopped happily through the village with no particular place to go. They were simply enjoying the day and exploring their surroundings. As the two frogs continued hopping, they suddenly noticed a big bucket that a farmer had left near the cowshed. Both frogs were curious. The small frog looked at the big frog, and the big frog looked at the small frog. The two frogs hopped closer to the bucket to see what was inside, but the bucket was very tall, and the frogs could not see inside it. Without thinking too much, the two curious frogs decided to jump inside the bucket. Splash! To their surprise, the frogs landed in a bucket filled with milk. At first the frogs laughed a little, but soon the frogs realized something was wrong. The sides of the bucket were smooth and slippery. No matter how hard the frogs tried, they could not climb out. The two frogs were stuck, so the frogs began swimming to stay afloat. Minutes passed, and those minutes slowly turned into hours. After swimming for a long time, the big frog began to feel very tired. The big frog looked at the small frog and said sadly, "My friend, we have been swimming for hours. There is no way out for us. We are going to drown. It is inevitable." But the small frog shook his head and said bravely, "No, my friend, we cannot stop now. We have faced hard times before, and we always found a way. We must keep swimming. Maybe someone will help us, or maybe we will find a way out. But we must not lose hope." So the two frogs kept swimming. They swam and swam as the sun slowly began to set. But as time passed, the big frog lost hope. The big frog sighed and said, "I cannot do this anymore. It is pointless. No matter how hard we try, we are still going to drown." And with that, the big frog stopped swimming. Slowly, the big frog sank into the milk and disappeared. The small frog was heartbroken. The small frog had lost his best friend. For a moment, the small frog felt very sad and lonely. But even though the small frog was full of grief, he refused to give up. The small frog whispered quietly, "My friend, I will not let your sacrifice be for nothing." And so the small frog kept swimming. The small frog kicked his legs again and again, remembering all the happy adventures he had shared with the big frog. Hour after hour, the small frog continued swimming in the milk. Then suddenly, something amazing began to happen. Because the small frog had been kicking and swimming for so long, the milk slowly began to change. The milk started to thicken. Little by little, the milk was turning into butter. When the small frog noticed this, he felt a new spark of hope. The small frog pushed himself even harder. Finally, the small frog stood on the thick butter and gathered all his strength. With one big jump, the small frog leapt out of the bucket. The frog was finally free. But even though the frog had escaped, the small frog still missed his best friend very much. The small frog slowly hopped toward the forest, knowing that life had to go on. A year later, the small frog found a mate and started a family of his own. To honor the memory of his lost friend, the frog named each of his children after the big frog, so that the brave frog would never be forgotten. Every night, the small frog gathered his children and told them the story of their Uncle Frog. The frog would always end the story with the same lesson. Life is not always easy. Sometimes things become very hard, and it may feel easier to give up. But remember this, my children, as long as you keep trying, there's always hope. You may not always win, but you will never know what you can achieve unless you try. And that is the story of the two frogs. If this story inspired you, please share it with others and leave a comment. Thank you for listening.